Hey, good morning, everyone. I think what I've been trying to show you for the last 15 minutes may not have been showing out live to you. If you were not seeing this slide previously, to tell you there was a short delay, I do apologize, as we have had some difficulty getting one of our presenters into the system this morning, and our IT department is working on that. So if you were not seeing this banner, I'm going to take just a minute for you to register your attendance at today's training. We do have 600 people online, so we do need a record of your attendance, and it allows us to send you some information related to the training when you give us your email address as you register. So just in case this was not showing live prior to a minute ago, there is a link for you to register attendance. That link is also in the chat box so that you can see it in chat and directly click on it there so that you may register. I do want to, before we begin, really stress that the Operation Connectivity Bulk Purchase Local Match Reimbursement Program is only for LEAs who participated in the bulk purchase program, paid your invoice to Region 4, and you have actually received or will receive an allocation of city or county CRF funding to help pay for your local matching on that bulk purchase. So there are 3 different reimbursement programs under the Coronavirus Relief Fund, or CRF funding, in CARES Act. One is under TDEM. This one, which is very specifically to match funds that you are receiving from your city or county. And then the third one will be for LEAs who purchased devices outside of the bulk purchase program, and that one will be coming at a later date. So want to make sure you're in the right training and that you are actually eligible for this program. So I'm going to give you just a minute to get registered before we begin. I want to make sure all my technology is working this morning. So if you would, in the chat, if you are a TEA staff member joining as a recipient of the training, meaning you're not inside the presenter mode, would you respond in the chat that you can see the slide and you can hear me? So before we can begin, I need one of my TEA staff who is listening to respond in the chat that you can both see the slide with the red banner on it and you can hear the presentation. All right, we're going to begin. I finally have confirmation that the system is actually working now. And again, I do apologize for the delay, and I apologize that you were not seeing the slide to tell you there was going to be a short delay in getting started due to IT issues. So at this point, I'm going to show you slides and remain talking. There will be 2 breaks during the presentation. And then if we can get the technology piece working, there will be a live demo of the application in the automated system when we get to that point, which will be about an hour and a half to 2 hours into the training. So I am required to put a disclaimer in all of our training now from our legal department. The CARES Act information is changing in many different ways, and some of the guidance from the different federal agencies does change rapidly. And so this is the best information that TEA has today related to this program area. This presentation does not constitute legal advice, and I am not an attorney. Therefore, if you have legal questions regarding the information, you need to seek guidance from your LEA attorney. So we're going to talk about the local match reimbursement program today. I'm going to give you an overview of the CARES Act CRF funding, which is the federal fund source that will be paying for this program. We will then go into details about the local match reimbursement program, talk about various monitoring, how the money can be used, and the various details about the program. Then we're going to talk about the application and the reimbursement process. While we think we've got a really good streamlined process for you, it is slightly different than any grant application process that you are accustomed to with TEA. This is not being done as a grant application. It is being done as a reimbursement. So there are a couple things that are different. It also requires you to upload specific documentation as part of the application process. So we'll go through the upload process and then talk about receiving the payments. And then hopefully at that point, we will have the technology issue worked out on our IT side so that we can show you a live demo of the system. I do have screenshots in the slides just in case. But hopefully we'll be able to get that live demo worked out for you. This Teams Live event is a new technology platform we're using at the agency. We have to use it rather than Zoom because of the number of participants. So it's a slightly different platform, and we've never encountered this issue before, that it's not letting one of our presenters in. So they're going to be working on that while we go through the training. So we're going to start with the overview of the Coronavirus Relief Fund. It is part of the CARES Act. As we've talked before, CARES Act is the 3rd stimulus bill. There is 2 additional versions of stimulus bills that are currently in Congress at this time, and you may have heard about them. One of them is proposed in the House. The other one is proposed in the Senate. They have some similarities and some big differences. We don't know what's going to happen to them. A lot of people are expecting one of those bills to be passed rather quickly and provide additional funding to education, both K-12 and higher ed. But right now we don't know the status. Well, the status is they're in process, but they're not moving. So we don't really know when those bills might become available. So right now we focus on the funding that's available in the CARES Act. There are many different sources of funding under the CARES Act. Most people think about the ESSER grant, which is section 18003. There is also money that goes to the governor's office under 18002. There's child care development block grant money that goes out to the Workforce Commission that will impact some LEAs. There's FEMA money that's in the CARES Act that'll go out to the Department of Emergency Management. There's also additional money for child nutrition that went out through the Department of Agriculture through their normal process. So LEAs really can be benefiting from the CARES Act from multiple fund sources. The one we're going to talk about today is Section 5001, and it is Coronavirus Relief Fund. And this is a federal fund source. And even though we're using this CRF money as a reimbursement program to LEAs, where you're reimbursing the LEA for state or local funds they have already expended, it is still federal money, and it retains the identity of being federal money regardless of how it's being used to reimburse state and local expenditures. So you have to keep in mind, even though you're participating in a state program, that was created by the governor's office, legislative leadership, and TEA, it is still federal money that is paying the reimbursement. So there will be some pieces where you really still have to pay attention and treat this reimbursement money as federal money. So again, Section 5001 is the Coronavirus Relief Fund. This is funding that is received and administered by the governor's office. It's designated in the CARES Act for uses by states and highly populated counties and city governments. So it is a CARES Act fund source that primarily went to the state. But if you are a city or a county that had a high population of over 250,000, that county or that city can also receive their direct allocation directly from the Department of Treasury rather than it coming through the governor's office. So in Texas, there were 12 counties, 6 cities that received their CRF funding as a direct allocation from the Department of Treasury. The remaining counties received their CRF allocation from the governor's office, who had the funding administered by the Texas Division of Emergency Management. So TDEM funded the remaining counties with the CRF funding. A portion of that allocation stays at the state level and to be used at the discretion of the governor's office. So the governor and legislative leadership have approved an amount of the state's CRF funding, and this is the state portion after all the counties have received their portion of funding. Governor and leadership approved a portion of the state money for K-12 education. That funding is coming in 4 basic projects. The first one is to reimburse school systems for pandemic expenses between March 1 and May 20th. That program is administered by the Division of Emergency Management, TDEM, and the application deadline for reimbursement for those expenses is September 30th. That application is out and available. There is training provided daily, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of each week at 1 p.m. that tells you how to request the funding, how to complete the application, how to submit the information, the expenses information that's necessary. Second project is Operation Connectivity, and it is the bulk purchase program where LEAs could work through Region 4, who is administering the program for TEA, and do bulk purchase ordering of devices and hotspots at greatly reduced pricing. So just a note, that bulk purchase option has already closed. That program is in progress. The bulk purchases have already been submitted, and some of those devices are actually starting to be shipped out to the LEAs who did participate in that program. Another part of that Operation Connectivity program is the bulk purchase local match reimbursement program that we're talking about today. This reimbursement program is being administered by TEA, as will be the 4th project under CRF funding, which is a prior purchase reimbursement program which will reimburse LEAs for technology purchases that were done outside of the Operation Connectivity bulk purchase. Now, that program has not been released yet, and it will be released probably in early October is my guess. There is a specific timeline on each of these programs, and they have slightly different allowable expenses, and they have slightly different dates of service. So the one in yellow, the Operation Connectivity Bulk Purchase Local Match Reimbursement Program, which has to be the longest project name we've ever had, that's the program we're talking about today. So I want to review eligibility one more time. To be eligible for the local match reimbursement program that we're talking about, the LEA had to have participated in the Operation Connectivity Bulk Purchase Program and paid their invoice to Region 4 for that 50% local share that the LEA is paying for the purchase of devices and hotspots. And the LEA must be receiving CRF funding from their city or county as part of that local 50% match. So there's two real key pieces that make an LEA eligible for this program. The first one is they have to have participated in the bulk purchase order. And the second key element is you must be receiving CRF funding from your city or county. So the local match program, for those LEAs who are eligible for the additional CRF local match, TEA will match dollar for every dollar that your city or county is contributing in their CRF funding. So you purchased an order for laptops, tablets, hotspots through Region 4. TEA gave money to Region 4 to pay for 50% of your order that you were allowed. You paid through the invoice, you paid Region 4 the remaining 50%. This program allows you to get 25% of that match, 25% of the program allocated to your LEA from your city or county that has CRF funding. In the event you secure that city or county CRF funding and you have the documentation for it, TEA will match that allocation. I need to talk a minute about this local match requirement. Those of you who live and work in the federal funding world with us know that local match, cost share, matching funds, those terms have very specific meanings under federal funding. The local match put into Operation Connectivity is slightly different. It is a state implemented local matching requirement. It is not a federally required match. So the fact that the state required the local match gives more flexibility in the rules around the local match. If the CRF federal funding required a local match, all the federal rules would apply to that match. But the CRF funding does not require the match. It is the state designed Operation Connectivity program that designs the local match. Okay, so because it's a state implemented matching requirement, we have a little more flexibility. And while this is not an in-kind match, it is a funding match that is required. We are able to give additional flexibility in what fund sources can be used to meet your local match. So the state has determined and is putting it in the grant, or not the grant, in the project guidelines, we had already told you that you could use your ESSER grant to pay part of the local match. We told you you could use your instructional materials allotment to pay the local match. The third bullet is new. We are also allowing that you can use any other federal grant to meet the local match if the activity, which is remote learning technology devices, if that activity is allowable under the federal grant. So in addition to ESSER grant, instructional materials allotment, you can use other federal grants and your state and local funding to make this local match requirement. Now, when you're using other federal grants, you need to remember a couple of things. The cost must be reasonable and necessary. You should not have a problem documenting either one of those. It must be allocable and allowable to that federal grant program. It has to meet all the programmatic requirements of that federal grant, including whichever supplement, not supplant requirement applies to that federal fund source. So let me give you an example. You want to use part of your Title I Part A allocation to basically split fund this technology purchase and use the Title I as the local match. To do so, you have to identify that Title I is the charge to Title I would be allocable and allowable to that grant. So we know it can be allowable. You have to meet the program requirements. Is the need for that technology identified in your comprehensive needs assessment? Is it addressed in your campus district plans? Can that purchase be evaluated using student achievement data? You're looking at your basic Title I requirements. If you can check all the boxes that yes, the purchase meets all the programmatic requirements of Title I, it fits in your supplement, not supplant methodology requirement, then you can use Title I Part A funding to meet part of your local match. You have to document it, but we expect you could use Title I Part A, you could use rural low income funds, you could use Title IV funding. So there's several fund sources in federal grants that could be additional sources of meeting your local match to this program. I hesitate to say it this way, but because it's a different type of match, being it's not a federally required match and it doesn't have to meet the federal matching requirements, being a state-imposed match requirement, kind of think of it like this. You're basically split funding this technology purchase between the operation connectivity funding the state provided and your local match fund sources. Whether it's any of these things listed on the screen or funding you get from the city or county or additional TEA money you get through this local match reimbursement. So I want to go through a couple of examples with you. So in the first example, the total bulk from the LEA was $100,000. When you place that order with Region 4, TEA contributed $50,000, the equivalent of 50% in our base match. You at the LEA then had to submit payment for the other $50,000 to Region 4. That's your local match. In this instance, you did not secure any additional funding from the city or county, so you're not getting any additional funding through this program from TEA. So in the end, TEA paid 50% of your costs for your bulk order purchase, and the LEA paid the other 50%. However, because you are not getting an allocation of CRF funding from your city or county, you would not be eligible for this program because you're not receiving local match from the city or county. There is no allocation for TEA to match and submit more funding to you through the local match reimbursement program. I want to show you a couple of other examples where you actually would be eligible for additional funding. So on example 2, we're going to stay with the same total bulk order of $100,000. TEA's basic match up front was $50,000. The LEA paid Region 4 for $50,000 for the local match. In this instance, let's say that the city or county paid the LEA $10,000 or allocated to the LEA $10,000 to go toward their bulk purchase. Through the local match reimbursement program, TEA is going to match that $10,000. So your final cost out of your $100,000 bulk order, TEA paid 50% up front, will match an additional 10%. So TEA is going to be paying $60,000 of your $100,000 cost. You received $10,000 from the city or county. So your LEA in the end receives all that technology for a cost of $30,000. And option 3 is the best option for the LEA, what we hope can work for all of you. Same $100,000 bulk order. You get a 25% or $25,000 contribution from your city or local CRF funding. TEA matches that $25,000. In the end, TEA has covered 75% of your cost, or $75,000. Your city-county CRF allocation covers the remaining $25,000. And in the end, the LEA did not have to contribute anything because you get reimbursed for your total local match, the original $50,000 you expended, half of it from your city and county and half of it back from TEA. This is the intent of the local match reimbursement program. So it's federal money. Two things are we always know are going to be required in federal money. You're going to be audited and you're going to have to document everything you do. So when you get a local match for reimbursement, keep in mind there is documentation you must be maintaining for any future audit or monitoring of this program. So you need to be documenting the percentage that is being paid from the matching fund sources. So whichever fund sources you used to pay your 50% local match, whether it's other state funds, local funds, ESSER funds, TIMA, other federal grants, you get money from the cities or counties, and you get the additional local match money from TEA. You need to document clearly where that 50% local match ended up being paid from and what percent each of those fund sources paid. Also, ensure you have either inventory records or your other documentation of appropriate safeguards being in place to protect the equipment that has been bought under this program. At least 50% of this equipment was paid with federal money, because at a minimum, the 50% TEA paid up front on your bulk purchase order is federal money. So anywhere from 50 to 100% of this purchase is federal funding. So make sure that, depending on how you record it, if it's a large enough purchase that it goes onto your inventory records, make sure you're meeting all the federal inventory requirements. And if it doesn't get inventoried, make sure you have the appropriate safeguards in place that are documented to protect the equipment. This is just like any other federal funding you receive. It's the same requirements. Also, make sure you have appropriate internal controls that are being implemented to ensure both that the equipment is used for its intended purpose and that you are protecting the equipment from fraud, waste, and abuse and theft. So you have to have those safeguards in place and have those appropriate internal controls in place to protect the equipment and know where the equipment's at. So the next couple of slides are about coding the funding and the purchases under Operation Connectivity. And we're going to put this out in the TEA FAQ document when it updates on Thursday, tomorrow. But want to share this information with you this morning. So you have a situation where you paid an invoice to Region 4 in your 1920 budget year for the devices that were purchased and that will be received potentially in 2021 budget year, and you'll get additional reimbursement money potentially in 2021. First off, we had a lot of phone calls and concern from people about paying the invoice to Region 4 when you had not received the equipment yet. And if you were using federal funding as part of that local match, that gave some people concern. And the people that contacted us, this is the answer we gave them. We are allowing a one-time exception with your federal funding for this project. So if you had to pay the invoice to Region 4 and use some federal funding as part of your local match to pay that invoice, we're allowing an exception for that. And if your independent auditor cites you for it, you need to not agree with the finding, and you need to cite that TEA allowed an exception for it, so that when your audit report comes into the agency and it gets reviewed and all your federal findings from your independent auditor go through Rogers Federal Fiscal Monitoring Division and then come to me before the agency makes a decision on sustaining the finding or not. That's part of the federal process and the federal requirements. The agency has to sustain or not sustain any finding against federal funds. If you have followed TEA's guidance and later been cited in your audit, we do not sustain that finding as long as we can see that you followed our guidance. So in this instance, if you get a finding for paying the invoice before you received the technology, we would not sustain that finding. Now, I do have to tell you, it is very important that you do not agree with the finding. If you agree with the finding, we may not catch in my very quick review of your documentation that you actually were following TEA's guidance and then got cited for it. So it is important, number one, disagree with the finding, citing that you were following TEA's guidance. And then we will not sustain the finding. But in your coding, there is a little issue in that 277 is not available in 1920. We didn't know we were going to have a pandemic. We didn't know we would get stimulus funding. So when the whole funding structure and the fund codes available for the 1920 school year, 277 does not exist yet. It will be available in 2021. So Roger Ingarani, who's the Director of Federal Fiscal Monitoring, has worked with David Martz in fiscal compliance, and they have worked out our recommendation of how you would code these Operation Connectivity activities. So you're going to record the computers, the purchase in the 1920 budget year in Fund 199, because 277 is not yet available to you. You then record the revenue in 2021 year in Fund 277, and you will transfer the funds from 277 to 1N99 as a reimbursement. noting that this will be a reconciling item on the CFA and the LEA will have to keep the paperwork from the original purchase. It's not ideal. We totally understand that. But this is how we recommend you code the expenditures. It seems like disaster funding, whether it's after a hurricane or it's a pandemic, it seems like the disaster funding always happens at the worst time of the year when you are changing from one fiscal year to the next. And the reimbursement programs always seem to come out after your fiscal year has closed. So we know the timing is not optimal. We know this coding is not optimal. But again, this is TEA's recommendation. This is what will come out in the guidance FAQ update tomorrow. And if you follow this recommendation and you get cited, we will not sustain the finding for following TEA's recommendation and guidance. Another question we're getting a lot is, do you code the TEA 50% portion on the purchase? Several business offices know there's a way you have to do this, and yes, you do. So you will code the TEA 50% of your purchase, and you will code it as a revenue and expense. All of this that goes into 277, you need to make sure you use a different object code. So anything you're coding under 277, you want to use different local option codes, different object codes for the LEA portion of the order, TEA's portion of the bulk purchase order, any local match reimbursement program funding you get from TEA, and any city or county CRF funding. All of it's CRF. So all of it's under 277. But you need to track it locally under different object codes to separate each one of those different types of transactions. Sorry, my audio clicked off. Let me go back to this slide just to make sure, because I don't know when the audio turned off. When you're coding all these different potential activities under 277 for coronavirus relief fund, and you've got different pieces of the project, you want to use different sub-object codes. And I think I said local object codes a while ago, but it's sub-object codes. You want to use a different sub-object code so that you are tracking each one of these different pieces of the process. Because we know the stimulus money that there is going to be monitoring and auditing of this funding. So federal level, the CRF money is administered by the U.S. Department of Treasury. The Department of Treasury has some of the strictest processes and procedures of any of the federal agencies. CARES Act allocates money not only for all these projects and programs that work their way down through the state to the local level, but it also allocates money for federal auditing and through the offices of Inspector General at the various federal agencies, and for programmatic monitoring to the federal agency itself. So the Office of Inspector General, we're looking at fiscal requirements, allowability, the use of funds. The Department of Treasury programmatic monitoring will look at some of those same issues, but also look at program requirements. So we know there will be federal monitoring. Now, the only question is whether the amount of funding that is allocated by the governor's office through TEA for Operation Connectivity and for these reimbursement programs, it will just depend if those are individual projects of the governor's office that are selected when OIG or Treasury monitor the state. In federal regulations, federal risk assessment, size of the award is one of the key factors. Texas will always be monitored under these federal reviews because the size of the state generates one of the top 3 or 4 allocations in almost any federal program. So we're always going to be one of the largest allocations. So we're always going to be a higher score on the risk assessment that the federal agencies use. So we know there will be federal monitoring. The federal statute says Office of Inspector General, the administrating federal agency, and then a clause of any other federal agency that is charged with compliance of the CARES Act. So we know there's going to be federal monitoring of this program. We also know that we at the state level are required to monitor this program. When we receive the funding, we agree that we will monitor in the program requirements and we will ensure that the funding is used for allowable uses. If we were not to agree to those requirements, the money would not be awarded to the state and the money would not come down to you at the LEA level. We will be doing fiscal monitoring and some programmatic monitoring. On the fiscal monitoring side, it will be desk review, but keep in mind there is always the potential for an on-site review from TEA. Most of our monitoring work is done through desk reviews, and we will be looking at fiscal requirements, looking at the uses of the funding. Did you use the funding for allowable uses under federal statute? Did you code the transactions appropriately? Can you track the funding through your books? All the fiscal general, the normal fiscal monitoring requirements, testing transactions, the things we normally look at. We also have to talk about programmatic monitoring because we're required to monitor from the program area as well. So under CARES Act, we are going to be doing program monitoring through targeted validation checks. So we're going to pick very specific requirements and do random validations. We will be doing validation requirements of the use of the reimbursement, and you'll see later there's 3 basic uses, 3 categories the uses of this reimbursement funding fall into. We'll be checking to see, did you use the reimbursement the way you told us you were, and what did you use it for an allowable use? We'll be doing random validations to check and see that you actually did receive that city or county CRF funding that you're telling us you were allocated. Things like that. So you know there's going to be a federal review at some point. There will be state monitoring of the CRF programs. But you are also required, because it's federal money, to be monitoring yourself. Your independent auditor may review the program. Depends on the size of it, depends on how big your allocation was. And this being a reimbursement program where your allocation is based on your expenditures, it just depends, you know, the size of the LEA doesn't really play into it as much in this program as it's the size of your bulk purchase order and how much local funding you put into the local match that you may then be getting back under federal money. So your independent auditor may or may not review this program. Regardless, you at the local level, it is federal funding, so you will be required to be implementing your standard internal controls and self-monitoring process. So as you are working with the Operation Connectivity program and you're receiving the technology, all that documentation we talked about earlier about safeguards and inventory and all the procedures, your normal the normal way you treat federal funding, your same internal control processes, the same self-monitoring processes. Because under federal regulation, you are to be monitoring yourself as you go through the process, identifying your own areas of non-compliance and concerns, and fixing and addressing those issues as you go. And it is no different with this program. The local monitoring piece is still required the same way. So all of this to, really focus that we know this is federal money, we know this is stimulus money, so that means we know it will be reviewed, audited, monitored. So you want to build your documentation system as you go. Set up your documentation folders, whatever it is, whether it's a folder system or whether it's an electronic system. Current environment, a lot of your documentation is going to be electronic. You can set up an electronic file system. Whatever you choose to do, set your documentation system up from the beginning and build your documentation as you go along, because we know the program is going to be monitored at some level. You will be monitored. So let's talk about the key dates in this program. The CARES Act, which included the CRF funding, was signed on March 27th. That's going to be key later on in one of the actual funding requirements of CRF funding. So CARES Act was signed on March 27th. We're providing the training today. The application for reimbursement is going to open on Monday, September 7th. Excuse me. Once it opens on September 7th, you're going to have till October 1st to submit your application. During that time, TEA is going to be processing complete reimbursement requests in a first in, first out basis. If we run out of funding before we run out of requests, which it is potentially possible, we will use the funding, all the funding that we have been allocated. But you just need to be aware that as soon as you can get all your information together, you need to go ahead and submit your application to get in the processing queue, because we are going to be processing them in the order received, and there is a possibility that we could run out of funding. Now, if we run out of funding and still have requests, I'm sure we'll be going back to the governor's office asking for more money for you, but there's no guarantee of that. So you do need to pay attention to the deadline, not wait till the very end. As soon as you can get all your application materials together, submit that online application, upload the documentation, and get in the queue for processing. So the application again closes on October 1st. This funding source ends December 30th. So in the CARES Act statute, it was signed in March. The CRF funding is only valid from March 1 to December 30th. And I understand there's 31 days in December, but whoever evidently wrote the statute picked December 30th for some reason. So March 1 to December 30th, and then the CRF funding is no longer valid. So your deadline of October 1 to get everything submitted, we have to have everything paid out no later than December 30th. And keep in mind, that slide earlier where we had the 4 different programs under CRF, and the third one is highlighted in yellow, and that's the one we're talking about today. That prior purchase reimbursement, which is the last bullet on that slide, still has to come out this fall, probably in early October. That program has to be paid out by December 30th as well. So we understand, again, timing is not the best on all this, but we're having to work within the timelines we have on these different fund sources. So CRF funding, the source of funds, Coronavirus Relief Fund, in the CARES Act statute, has 3 requirements that have to be met to be an allowable use of that funding. First, it has to be a necessary expenditure that you incurred as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. It has to be costs that were not accounted for in your most recently approved budget on March 27th. That's the key date of when the CARES Act was signed from the timeline. And the allowable cost had to be incurred from March 1, and in this case, through the date that we receive your reimbursement application. Since it is a reimbursement, it has to be for costs you have already expended. So 3 things that are in statute, and you put those 3 together, and it requires the activity to be supplemental and not be a supplant. So this funding is different from your ESSER grant. Your ESSER grant does not have a supplemental provision, but the CRF funding used in these reimbursement programs do have a supplemental provision. The 3 requirements for it to be allowable, that it must be because of the pandemic, not in your budget on March 27th, it occurred after March 1st. These 3 things together make this funding only allowable to be used on supplemental cost. Now, there are no specific uses in the actual statute. Most of your federal statutes have a section that gives you examples of allowable uses of funds for that program. And CRF funding does not contain that. So the U.S. Department of Treasury, as the administering federal agency, defined what the allowable expenses for the grant or for the program funding are. There are 2 items related to education in those specific uses that are allowed by the Department of Treasury. So the first one is expenses to facilitate distance learning, which includes your technology. So improving distance learning in connection with closings due to COVID-19. And then the second one is still tied to that, but it's eligible expenses, which include payroll for staff or faculty who were responsible for developing online learning capabilities necessary to provide instruction in response to closures. So these 2 items are the education-specific allowable uses of CRF funding. The Department of Treasury also explicitly said there are a couple of things that are not allowable. The first one being payroll of benefits for any staff who are not substantially dedicated to mitigating and responding to the public emergency. So your general LEA employees are not an eligible expense under CRF funding. And that's very different from your ESSER grant that you're familiar with, where almost any employee in the LEA could be paid with ESSER funding. Under CRF, those general staff are not allowable. It is very specific only to those staff who have a substantial role in the online learning piece. And again, you also can't double dip. So any expense that has been or will be reimbursed under any other federal program cannot be charged to the CRF funding. So you can't pay the expense twice under different programs. This is going to become really important as you're dealing with these multiple reimbursement programs under CRF, your ESSER grant, and some of your other federal grants that some of these activities remain allowable in. But just thinking about the 3 different reimbursement programs under CRF and your ESSER grant, you have a lot of overlap of allowable activity. This technology expense is basically allowable in general under all 3 CRF programs and the ESSER grant. So you are really going to have to be careful to document clearly what program is paying what expense And especially if you get to the point that you are split funding some of these expenses across program areas. So your documentation is going to be key. So under this particular reimbursement program for local match reimbursement, the funds that TEA pays you under this reimbursement can only be used a couple of ways. First is to actually journal voucher or reclassify the original expense to Region 4. And this is actually the preferred use of the reimbursement. It's what it's really intended for, is that it's paying you back. It's reimbursing your LEA for that expense you paid to Region 4 on your bulk purchase. So you would either journal voucher or just reclassify those original expenses and replace them with this CRF reimbursement funding. But due to the timing, we know some of you that's not really going to be a good option for you. So some of you may choose to not reclassify those expenditures and just use the funding for an additional supplemental cost that would be eligible under the CRF statute. So if you're doing that, the date of service has to be July 17th, which is the date Operation Connectivity was announced, through October 1, whenever you submit your application to us. So, just keep in mind those costs that were incurred by the LEA prior to May 21st, so March 1 to May 20th, those costs should be requested for reimbursement through TDEM. Other technology purchases will be eligible in the prior purchase reimbursement that comes out in October. So this money is for your bulk purchase local match. If you're not able to just reclassify those initial expenditures, then you have to use the money for something that is still allowable under CRF. Now, I threw a couple of slides in here to talk about the issues that some of you may be having with city and county, or the issues that actually some of your counties are incurring. For your city and county to be able to allocate funding to you at the LEA for local match, sometimes it's not an issue that they don't want to. Sometimes it's an issue of the rules that they are under for their CRF funding that the county received or the city may have received. So the Department of Treasury, the federal agency administering this program, categorized allowable expenses into 6 categories. And they said the CRF funding, 75% of it must be spent in the category of medical expenses, public health expenses, and then payroll that's dedicated for staff for mitigating and responding to the emergency. The education piece does not fit in that 75% category. Education expenses fall into the remaining 3 categories, which are all in the 25%. So the counties, cities who get CRF funding are actually held to this 75-25 split, and the money they want to allocate to LEAs falls in the 25%. We have had multiple meetings with this on TDEM. They can't change the requirement because it comes from Department of Treasury. However, there is not a sequence to the required expenditures. The city county is not required to expend the allowable 75% first before they can allocate money in the 25% category. So they don't have to spend the 75% of their funding before they can allocate money down to an LEA. It's just at the end of the project, the county has to ensure that at whatever amount of their allocation they actually expended, 75% of those expenses has to be in medical, public health, or mitigating and responding to the emergency. So the total amount that the county expends They have to spend 75% of their total amount in those categories and no more than 25% in the remaining category where education costs fall. Let me go back to it. We've also heard from some instances where small counties in some cases may not even have a hospital in the county. So there is not, there's not an easy way for the county to expend 75% of their funding in the required areas around medical, health, and emergency. So it's not always that the county or the city doesn't want to contribute. Sometimes they're facing the programmatic requirements from the Department of Treasury that have been placed on their funding. And we understand that. We all work and live in this federal funding world, so we understand the requirements that come down with the federal money. You know, the only thing that we can offer you is they might be able to, maybe they can't allocate the full 25% you would like, or that they would hope to, but maybe they can allocate something to your LEA, because they have to focus on the total amount they will expend that doesn't exceed 25% in education. So work with your cities and counties, understand that they do have these restrictions, but see if there may be potential for them to allocate some amount to the LEA. Remembering this, there's not a sequence of spending required. It's the requirement will actually be checked at the end of the project. A couple of other miscellaneous requirements in CRF funding that do apply to the local match reimbursement program is there will be quarterly reports throughout the end of the project. This is a short-term project, so at most there may be 2 reports. This is a CARES Act requirement for quarterly reporting. You'll remember Department of Education decided they had other existing reports that the state reports to them on a monthly and quarterly basis that would meet the CARES Act requirements. That has not been the case with Department of Treasury. They are still requiring quarterly reports of all CRF funded projects. The first quarter that we will have to report on is July 1 through September 30th. Our deadline is October 1, so only the early submissions may be included in this first quarterly report. The remainder will be in the October through December report. The timeline on this reporting is not good. The quarter ends September 30th, and the governor's office has to have a statewide report into Treasury by October 13th. So working backwards, your quarter ends on September 30th. The report from the LEA to TEA will be due October 2nd. TEA is aggregate the state level data and report to the governor's office by October 5th. And then the governor's office reports to the feds by October 13th. You know, that looks like I'm giving the LEA 2 days and I'm taking 3 days. The reality is that 3 days that I get is over a weekend. So my staff will be working the weekend to try to get this reporting done. You know, it's not good. The reporting timeline it is what it is, but it's not good, and we all understand that. The only good news I can give you is that maybe, and it's a maybe because we don't know yet, because Treasury has not sent the governor's office any detail on the data elements required of these quarterly reports. All we have is what's in the federal statute, but maybe they won't go any more detail than what's in the statute. And if they stay with the 2 items in statute that are on your screen, I can pretty well pull this information out of the application data that we're collecting, and you may not have to submit anything. But I have to tell you, it's a possibility that there could be a quarterly report, which would be potentially 2 reports on this project. And there could be data collection where we would have to collect something from the LEAs, and it would be a very short turnaround. In statute, it talks about reporting the amount of funds that were expended by activity and having a detailed list of the types of activities which the money is obligated, which includes the name of the activity and the description of the activity. Most of that information, I think we're going to have in the application process. So if they don't go any more detailed than this, we may not have to collect anything additional from the LEAs for these quarterly reports. Also, just to point out, there is no private school equitable service in the CRF funding. CRF funding comes out of 5001. The equitable service requirements under CARES Act only apply to Section 18002 and 18003. So there is no private school piece to this program. So at that, we're going to answer a few questions, and then we are going to take a 10-minute break. There are a few questions. I need to get through everything. One of you put that you have not heard any audio for the last 15 minutes. This technology is not being nice to me today. I don't know what the issue with the audio has been in the last couple of minutes.
Corey?
Yes.
We published the content questions of the program, fielded over 150, and we've had mixed audio results. So you do need to register. We will send the recording, but most of the issues are local to machine. So we've not been seeing anything else. So I've handled most of those, so we can take them from the top. But bulk of the questions, the two major ones we're seeing are around eligibility. And there's also some confusion around the difference between the bulk purchase program and the match. And then a big question is, how do you reach out to your city and county? And I can clear them as you address those. But
all right. I don't know what the audio issue is from reading the various things that are being submitted to you. Some of you have not lost audio. Others have lost audio in patches. I will tell you, I do intentionally pause between slides every now and then. So I don't know what the audio issue is. I apologize for that. But as Matt said, this is being recorded, and we will make the recording available as soon as we get it back through the system. All right, so let me try to address the question about, the bulk purchase versus the local match. And I totally agree with you guys. This is so confusing. And having 4 different programs under CRF that are so similar yet slight differences, it is confusing. So let me just start with the slide we had earlier. There's 4 pieces that are under the CRF funding. The first one is that the governor and leadership early on allocated money to reimburse LEAs for COVID-related costs that occurred from March through May 20th. And everybody asks, why May 20th? May 20th is the date they made the allocation. They said, okay, from the 1st of March till today, and we're allocating X amount of money. So that program is additional cost because of the pandemic between March 1 and May 20th. That one is being administered by TDM. The application's open right now, and it's due September 30th. The next project is Operation Connectivity, which has really 3 pieces: the bulk purchase of devices, the local match to city and county funds, and then the separate prior purchase reimbursement to reimburse districts who purchase their own technology devices, not knowing that the bulk purchase was going to be an option. So within Operation Connectivity, the first piece was the bulk purchase, and that was done through Region 4. And TA notified people, collected a survey, and then you worked with Region 4 based on a calculation of how much technology you could order for your LEA through that bulk purchase program. Region 4 had some amazing people working with them, and they negotiated and got the prices of laptops, tablets, hotspots reduced. So you got a really, really good purchase price because Texas placed an order, a bulk order all together. And what that did was get us really good pricing, and it got you faster shipping dates. So instead of, you're somewhere down the line of 50 or 60 or 70 LEAs who've ordered technology from this one particular provider, the bulk purchase for the state moved up the list because it was such a huge order. So in that bulk purchase, TEA paid half your cost through Region 4, and you paid Region 4 the other half of the cost of that order. That half you paid is called the local match. So that's the bulk purchase program, and you're done. As long as you've paid your invoice to Region 4, you're done. You're just waiting on your order to be delivered. Another piece of that program is if you could go out to your city or county and get an allocation of their CRF funding to go toward the LEA's cost, then TEA will match that county or city allocation dollar for dollar. So the half of your order, that 50% cost you paid to Region 4, you can get money back on that expense from your city and county, and then whatever they pay, TEA will match, where you could actually get your initial cost down to zero, because TEA paid half of it up front on the bulk purchase, and then through the local match reimbursement program, your city or county can pay 25% and TEA will match that, and in the end, you get a zero cost to the LEA. Now, for all the people who didn't know bulk purchase was going to come out in the middle of July and had already purchased their own technology and already placed their own orders for technology, then there will be another reimbursement coming for those costs later in October. So the big question is, how do you get your city or county to allocate funding to you for part of your local match? And the process is going to be a little bit different for every city and county, but basically you want to submit a request to the appropriate officials and request an allocation of their county or city, but I'm going to talk county because every county has money. So you're going to request them to allocate some of their county CRF funding to your LEA for the purpose of bulk purchase computer technology. We've heard districts having charters, some of you having greater success when you go in a group. If there's 5 school districts in one charter in your county, that the 6 of you go as a group and make the request. It's going to be a slightly different process who you submit your request to. Doing it by phone, doing it in person seems to be preferred a lot of the time. Depending on your local situation, you may not be able to do it in person. But requesting them to allocate to your LEA part of their CRF allocation, understanding and knowing they have these requirements that 75% has to be spent on health. You know, you may be educating your county officials that there's not a sequence to the spending. You know, as long as in the end they're going to spend 75%, they can go ahead and allocate that other 25% to education. They just have to meet that 75-25 split on the total expense by the end of the project. So, you know, there's not a set process of how to do it, but you do have to reach out to the city or county officials and request part of that allocation. You need to be working on that now so that you can get that allocation and get some type of documentation from the city or the county and be able to submit your application by October 1st to get our matching reimbursement program. Question about the quarterly reports. We don't know yet what you would have to submit because we don't know the data elements. The first report for the quarter that goes through September 30th is going to be a very small report because it would only be if we actually have payments made out by September 30th. Again, Governor's office hasn't got any detail from the Department of Treasury. And so right now we don't know exactly what the reporting will look like. We are very hopeful that we will not have to get any data from the LEAs on it. We're hopeful that it will stay the basic data and statute that we can pull from your application. Another question, can you receive funds from the county without having been part of the bulk purchase program? Yes, you can. It's just TEA is only matching what you received under bulk purchase. So if you did all your own individual purchases of laptops or hotspots, you can still request funding from the county to pay part of your cost, but TEA is not matching anything under the prior purchase program that comes out in October. The match is related to the bulk purchase program that we're talking about today. But yes, you can still request funding from your city or county and from their CRF allocation. The federal guidelines on CRF that went down to the county level do allow the county to suballocate those funds down to cities or LEAs, any other subunit of government within that county. So that's generally the questions that staff haven't already tried to address for you. It is 11 o'clock. We are going to take a break now, and we are going to resume the training in 10 minutes. So we'll start back at 10 after 11 and go through the application and the uploading documentation process for you. All right, we are back. We are going to continue and talk about what the application looks like in the reimbursement process. I do want to stress that registering at that link that we provided in the early listing to the chat is very important. The technology issue, the IT issue, is not going to be fixed within the next hour to be able to show you a live demo going into the system. So we are trying to get something scheduled and provide that something for you to show you a live demo of the system maybe later in the week, maybe on Friday. And if we can get that set up, we will send that information out to the email addresses you're giving us on that registration form. So it is very important for you to register. So some of you have asked for the slides. We will send the slides out through that email that you give us on the registration link as well. So we're going to go ahead and continue and talk through the application and reimbursement, the application schedules, the process. So it's going to be a slightly different process than a grant application. Hopefully it goes quicker. And the application itself is due by October 1st. The LEAs are going to submit a request for the application. You're going to fill the forms out online. You're going to get to sign, your authorized official will sign it through DocuSign. And then it will generate the upload information, the link to give where you can go in and upload the documentation from your city or county about the allocation they're giving you. And those two pieces complete the application and documentation phase. And once they're done, all your information comes to my staff, and we will start reviewing and doing all the required cross checks to process your request. And we will be actually processing those requests in order received. And we will be making the payment out through our accounting department. So this is not going to be something that you go into the grants expenditure reporting system and request a payment. Once we approve your information, this will be an automatic payment through our accounting department, the same way that your LEA receives your monthly FSP allocation or any other payment that comes from the agency. Because being a reimbursement, we're able to use this quicker process. So the first step is to complete the application. So to get the application, your LEA will send an email to customer service at teabulkorder.com, and you're requesting the local match reimbursement forms. So everything in this Operation Connectivity program with the bulk order and the local match goes through this email address. You're not going to be emailing TEA staff directly. You're going to use customer service at teabulkorder.com. That email address does everything. And it is going to create your application. And they will send you an email back that will have a link in it. And when you get the email, it will look something like this. It'll tell you, thank you for requesting it. We received your request for the CRF reimbursement matching forms, and it'll have a link. When you click on that link, you're going to go into application forms for your LEA. Now, the other thing we're doing in all these emails is after the link, you notice the second red arrow is pointing to some instructions. And the email will always point out the next step or two in the process. So it gives you the link to go to your forms. Then it tells you when you receive the form, complete the required fields. When you're done, hit complete to submit the reimbursement form. You will then receive an email from customer service acknowledging receipt. So you can always follow through the process through the emails, because the last part of the email always tells you the next piece of your process. So when you click on the link, it's going to pop up the program guidelines, and this should look familiar to you. You will have to scroll through these program guidelines. When you get all the way through the program guidelines, there is a set of Governor's Office CRF guidelines, because this is Governor's Office CRF funding. 9 pages TEA program guidelines, 23 pages of Governor's Office. Scroll through all of it. There is a checkbox on the bottom left corner. You have to check that box saying you agree to the guidelines, and then you will click the purple button at the bottom of the page that says I agree. Once you click the I agree button, you check the box, click the button, it will open your LEA's forms to request local match reimbursement funding. The forms look very similar, and you should recognize they look similar to what you're used to seeing in a TEA paper grant application. When you get to what would be the bottom of page 1, you'll see the applicant information, the certification. You'll see everything that looks like your normal. The system is pre-populating a lot of the information for you. So for example, this is the applicant information, the middle of page 1, if you were looking at a standard grant application. The reason there is not a generic link to go open a set of forms is that we are pre-populating everything we can for you. So when you submit the email to customer service, they will generate your pre-populated forms, and you get that email back with the link. You click the link, you scroll through all the program guidelines. You're now in the dynamic online forms. Everything we have will be pre-populated for you. Everything you need to enter will be in a red field like what's shown on the screen. And I can tell you we are still in the process of pre-populating everything. So the vendor ID will be pre-populated for you. DUNS numbers will be pre-populated. If I have your vendor ID and DUNS number, they will be pre-populated. You will have to give us some of the contact, excuse me, some of the contact information, but information will be highlighted in red that you need to submit. Certification incorporation, you have to check the boxes, you have to fill in the information. It is important to note that everything for this application process is signed through DocuSign, the same way you had to sign your bulk order forms. The authorized official that you enter in this section is the person who is going to receive the email from DocuSign to sign the application. So if you're filling out these application forms, you're listed as one of the contact people. Someone else will be the authorized official. Please let them know that they will be getting an email from DocuSign to sign the application. The form continues. It looks, again, just like standard grant application forms, same type of content. You have a set of statutory and programmatic assurances. So you do have to check each one of the boxes. These are standard assurances and then some, programmatic assurances as well. The allowable use of reimbursement funds, this is what we would normally call a program page in an application. So at the top of the page, what you're seeing on the top of the screen is a question about the allowable use of the money. So you have those three options we talked about earlier. The first box is reclassifying the original expenses that were paid to Region 4. Second box is expenses to facilitate distance learning. If you choose to not reclassify the expenses, so you're not marking box 1, you have to mark the second or third box. If you mark the second box and you're buying additional devices with the reimbursement money, you can't do the reclassification process. You've already paid for those items. So you're getting this new reimbursement money. You want to buy additional items with it. You're going to mark the second box. And if you're buying additional devices, you then have to complete the next section. The third option on your allowable uses of the reimbursement money, as we talked about earlier, are the other eligible expenses, including payroll for those staff who are significantly responsible for developing the learning system during closures. So you have three allowable uses of this money. Reclassifying the original cost is the preferred use, but we understand that may not work for everybody. If you do end up using the reimbursement to buy additional laptops, tablets, or hotspots, or even some other type of connectivity item, then you will fill out this next section that talks about additional devices to be purchased. So if you're going to buy additional tablets, you're going to check the box for tablet and then go over and tell us the number of tablets you're purchasing with the reimbursement funding. So this page on the screen basically equates to the program schedule of how you're going to use the reimbursement funds. Because it is funding from the federal government, we do have the GEPA 427 equitable access and participation question, just like you see in a normal grant application. It is defaulted to the first radial button that you're saying there are no barriers to equitable access and participation in this project. If you do feel there is a barrier to equitable access and participation, you will check the second radial button. And by checking that barriers do exist, you must then complete at least one line below it. So you have to identify one of the groups of intended beneficiaries, and once you identify that group, you state what the barrier is and how you're going to address it. So it's automatically preset to the first no barriers radial button. If you do have barriers, you change that and select the second button, barriers do exist, and you must complete at least one line. Then you're going to get to a short set of questions about your bulk order quantities and the matching commitment. So you have the name of your organization. You're going to enter the total amount of your bulk order purchase. And make that is not the LEA amount that you pay Region 4, it's the total bulk purchase amount. You will then have a drop-down menu where as you start typing the name of your city or county, it will have a drop-down that you will select your county or city. And then to the right, you are going to tell us the amount of your allocation from your city or county. Then there is a drop-down question. Did your city or county also grant CRF funding to other LEAs as part of this program? You select yes or no. At that point, you have two buttons on the bottom of the form. You can save the draft and come back to it later, or if you're ready to submit and continue the process, you can click on Review Form. Now, when you click Review Form, if you have anything that is not complete, you will see this blue bar, which I think we're actually changing to red before the system opens on Monday. So you'll see this bar that says, please fill all the required fields to continue. It will take you back to any place that you skipped a field. And again, they will be identified in red. You will see on the applicant information in this example, we did not put phone numbers. So it identifies in red for you the fields that need to be completed so that you can submit the form. You will then go back and hit the review button to continue again. And it will give you a button to make sure you are ready to submit your forms. When you are ready to submit, you will click on the submit button and you will get a message telling you that your forms have successfully been submitted. It tells you you'll receive an email with DocuSign for signature. So you'll get an email as the contact person, you will get an email from customer service telling you the same information, that it's been submitted and that the DocuSign email is being sent. Remember, the DocuSign email goes to the person you entered as the authorized official. So if you're the contact person, the DocuSign is going to an authorized official who is someone else. Make sure you let them know to be expecting it. Now, there have been several questions that have come up over who can be the authorized official. This is just like any other federal grant. Whoever is authorized in your LEA to submit federal grant applications, those same people can submit this reimbursement request. But because it is federal money, the person who is authorized official is either the superintendent or they have been designated as an authorized official. And this is where I can't tell you what your process is. It varies. Some LEAs, the school board designates who is an authorized official and who besides the superintendent can be delegated as an authorized official. In other LEAs, it is the superintendent is the authorized official and the school board authorizes the superintendent to delegate as needed. Either way, the authorized official has to be a person who has been delegated that authority to enter the LEA into a binding commitment for federal funds. So if you're not the authorized official, make sure the authorized official knows this email is coming from DocuSign. So you as the contact person will receive an email that looks something like this. It tells you it's been submitted. You'll be receiving the DocuSign agreement to sign the forms. The authorized official will receive the email from DocuSign. If they don't get it within a decent amount of time, they always need to check the spam folder. Hopefully you're using the same authorized official that you used on the bulk purchase, the actual technology order, and most of these DocuSign emails will already be set up and they won't be going to spam. But in the event they don't receive this, do check your spam folder before you contact customer service asking about why you didn't receive it. So when the authorized official receives this DocuSign email and they click on the yellow button in the middle that says review document, they will get a document that should look almost identical to what you're accustomed to seeing from TEA. And they can scroll through and look at all the responses that have been filled in. At this point, this document is for preview and to sign only. It cannot be edited by the authorized official in this view. So when the authorized official is ready to sign, down on the signature line, they will click on the yellow box that says sign. And when they then do that step, they will be signing the document. And then the finish button on the top right of the screen, the yellow button in the blue line, and that completes the DocuSign process. They'll get an email telling them the document has been completed. At that point, they can click the button in the blue there that says View Completed Document, and that's where they will see a fully signed application. So if you need to edit the application or amend those forms, it's the same process. You know, the authorized official may scroll through and say, oh, we need to fix this and not sign it.